So today's lecture will be dedicated to pre-modern science. So as far as you remember, last time we told about the different attitudes and different developments of the question, when did the science appear? And one of the positions was that science has always been. The other position was that science appeared during the Antiquity, during the time of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So we are going to follow this logic, and we will try to develop these positions. So first of all, we'll say some words about science in the early states of East. First of all, we have to say that by the early states of East, we mean the states of ancient Egypt, ancient China, ancient India, and Mesopotamia. Then we will try to focus on the science in Antiquity, the ancient Rome and ancient Greece tradition. And here we have two positions. A is the principles of theoretical knowledge, so how did theoretical knowledge appear? And the position B, so the second one, is knowledge versus opinion. How do we understand, how in ancient tradition, first of all in the Greek tradition, did they separate the ideas of knowledge? So what knowledge meant for the Greek mentality, and what did opinion mean for the Greek mentality? Because these positions are really crucial in terms of understanding the specific or scientific approach to the question discussed. The fourth section will be, we'll try to focus in the fourth section on the science in Middle Ages, and two main things that we have to mention here will be the postulates and the dogmas of religion as the very basis of science, understood as scientia in medieval tradition. And the second position will be about the university's autonomy. University's autonomy, because Middle Ages is the time when the first secular universities really came into life. Also, after this agenda for the lecture, I will say some words about the examination task and how do we see the examination, and also how to deal with the examination task. So if you have any questions concerning the examination, you're welcome to ask either today or by email, so I will try to answer you as fast as possible. So, first of all, we have to remember that science is a very vast concept, a very vast term, from the point of view of, well, if you speak about its volume as the very notion. So when we speak about the early states of East, the very first civilizations, and by the latter we mean, as I have already said, Chinese civilization, the civilization of India, Egyptians, Mesopotamian, well, we also can say Babylonic or any other name for that. So we have to concentrate on the idea that the scholars usually describe this kind of pre-scientific knowledge as the archaic way of thinking or ethnical science. What do we mean by pre-scientific knowledge? So first of all, we have to revise the very concept of science. By science nowadays, especially in the English language, we mean that field of human intellectual activity which is dedicated to the principal questions of nature. So how do we understand the process of nature, the laws of nature, what are the rules that really nature follow in its development, in terms of our understanding and in terms of our approaches, first of all, experimental approaches. So the usual answer to this question, when did science appear, is it appeared in the modern times, in times of the modern age. So usually scholars say about any other forms of science or any other forms of knowledge as pre-scientific or pre-modern forms. That is why they coined the term of the archaic way of thinking, because we deal with the sphere of human spirit, such sphere of human mind even, when mythology and mythological concepts were still alive. And we cannot say speaking, for example, about ancient China or ancient India, or especially in Mesopotamia or Egypt, that these forms of mythological concepts and mythological way of thinking could be really distinguished from something we could understand as scientific as such, something experimental, because there was no idea of experiment at that time. So, of course, this pre-scientific knowledge is quite complicated, and speaking about its volume as a notion, it's quite vast. And we have to mention that it contains such achievements, because each knowledge has its own achievements and characteristics on the other side, on the other hand. So such achievements could be, among these achievements we have to mention the complex numeral systems, which were developed in China, in India, of course in Phoenicia and so forth. Then the first calendars that really differ. We have various calendar systems from culture to culture and from civilizations to civilizations. Of course, well, probably one of the most striking examples of this kind of national calendar or ethnic calendar, let me put it like this, was the discovery of such system in the Mayan tradition when the first conquerors came to America in the very beginning of the modern age. Then, of course, we have to mention the first, maybe in terms of our scientific approach, primitive, but still very well developed natural observation. And as the consequence from this observation and the development and the approaches to this kind of observation, we find the specific sets of astronomic, of astrological, geographic, medical, technical, and other knowledge. Of course, for example, ancient Egypt is famous for its medicine, for its surgery. We have to mention the special development and special attitudes to medicine in ancient China, of course, and so forth. So by these consequences, we have the possibility, well, we even have the opportunity to give the characteristics of this kind of knowledge and this kind of way of thinking. So the next peculiar thing about this pre-scientific knowledge is that this kind of knowledge, or this type of knowledge, existed within the oral tradition and was maintained by ritual and practice. So this is a crucial position, because you understand that there were only some narrow circles of those who were really dedicated to this knowledge. For example, we speak about families that had this specific knowledge. For example, the families of the Chaldeans in Babylonia, or the certain circles of priests in ancient Egypt, which also could be considered not only as sages but scientists. And this tradition was oral because much sense was, well, it really depended depended on the idea of the spelling. So if you remember Harry Potter, of course, you know that there were two kinds of magic, right? Two kinds of magical ways. So either you spell something or you curse somebody, right? So the spell, in this sense, is something positive. In English, we have this word spelling. So when we don't know how to write something, we usually ask to spell it, right? So, for example, how could you spell pen, right? P-E-N. And that means that we know how to write this. That means that we know not only the technique of writing, but also the meaning of our action. So when we know how to spell the word, or we know how to spell the name, especially when we speak about the pharaohs, we speak about the kings and different high priests, we not only know the name of this person, but we also know the very essence, the very substance of this precise person or this precise thing. That is why oral tradition was very close to the wizard's tradition, or the tradition of, well, really the magical approach. So, what are the characteristics of science of the early stages? So, as I have already mentioned, they mostly could be given as the consequences from the very type of pre-scientific knowledge. So, first of all, we have to note that close groups really possessed this kind of knowledge, and we have already discussed this. Also, we mean the religious elements in knowledge, because as we have magical approach to reality, as we have really mythological mentality of archaic civilizations or early states, we first of all deal with reality as something full of gods, as something full of deities, right? And we have to give special names to these deities. We have to develop special approaches to this reality. That is why it is very important also to know who is our defender, right? Who gives us this knowledge. And you remember that, for example, in ancient Greece, we have, we face with Asclepius as the protector of the medicals, right, and the doctors. For example, in Egypt, we have the special protectors and defenders for the pharaoh or for the priests and so forth. That is why it will be very interesting to compare this kind of approach of the archaic states and the Christian civilization of Middle Ages, because as you remember, they also did not give their own opinion, but they were very well focused upon the authority that gives this right to give, delivers this right to give their opinion to the people. So we will discuss this Christian approach a bit later. Also, the demand of practice, we have to understand in terms of prescription in knowledge. So we have certain recipes, so to do like this and not to do like this. So we have to follow these prescriptions. And if we do, we really succeed. If we don't, we fail. And that is very close to the second position of religious elements. So if we speak about the tradition of pre-scientific knowledge, we have to, and pre-scientific practice as well, we have to mean that those who developed this kind of knowledge were very closely connected with the religious institutions of that state. And not to follow the tradition was, of course, the prohibition of the law. And finally, we deal with the variety of unsystematic data in this pre-scientific kind of knowledge and sciences. By unsystematic data, and I have to underline this, that unsystematic in terms of our modern mentality and our modern approaches to science, we have a lot of different things, a lot of stuff, right, that really was delivered from the nature observation, that was got from the different practices, the rituals, and of course the medical manipulations, for example, different operations, different, even geographical discoveries. But on the other hand, we really cannot systematize it anyhow, because when we try to create a map of the ancient world, it will be completely different from the map that we have nowadays, almost for each region of Europe or Asia or Africa or something like that. Certainly when we speak about medicine in ancient Egypt or in ancient China, it will be completely different from what we understand by medicine nowadays. That is why this unsystematized character of pre-scientific knowledge is a characteristic of this side of knowledge. And we, as the illustrations, as the examples of these developments and really the achievements of this archaic way of thinking, we have to mention the numeral system of ancient China, also called Aizin, right? So you remember that this is not only something mathematical, right? It's not only something, let me say, scientific, right, in these terms, but also it has a certain religious function, and this is one of the most famous, most well-known magical practices of modern age, right? Which really came to Europe in Renaissance or in more early modernity. Then the next illustration is about the Egyptian medicine. So here we see not only the one who may be considered to be a patient, right? Probably a pharaoh or a high priest, but also the mythological creatures, the deities. So here we have Anubis as the one who protected doctors in ancient Egypt, and also he was the descender of God, right? So he will, this god, this deity Anubis, will also lead the dead person, his soul, to the kingdom of the dead. And here probably we see either the wife of the dead person, or probably the person who just really in remorse that this, and in misery that this person has died. You remember that in ancient Egypt there were professional remorses, let me say, the professional people who really cried following the funeral, the funeral procession. And also a very interesting thing that we have as a kind of evidence, really, as we have that we have from the archaic period of the early states, is the examples of the architecture. So here we see the zikkurat, as we call it, or just we may say the temple of god of moon, Nana, in Mesopotamia. So this is how it really looked as a reconstruction in very ancient times, probably more than 12th century BC, probably the 18th or even 20th. And here, as we have it nowadays, so this is the photo from the 20th century. By this we also see that different temples and, well, even different buildings have their not only architectural meaning, but also the religious idea, right? And at the same time scientific idea, because in these buildings they really did the cults, and they developed some religious things, some religious procedures, but at the same time this was the temple of science, because here they got the knowledge about astronomy, about the astrological things, and also this was the basis of how to make the first calendars, right? Something the same we have in Mayan culture or the Aztec culture in the American tradition, but now we're speaking about the early states of East, right? So we're not going to discuss the Americas anymore. The next question that we have to deal with is science in antiquity, and the very first point is the principle, so what are the principles of the theoretical knowledge? The theoretical form of knowledge, let me say, because you remember that when we answered to the question about the Greeks really emerged science as, well, developed science as we understand this notion now, we meant that theory was something which was the early states of East were lacking, right? So by theoretical, before we will deal the principles of theoretical knowledge, we have to coin some concepts concerning this knowledge. So how did they understand what knowledge really is? And via this we will try to understand what did they mean by science. So first of all, we meet, when the Greeks, so this really, not what did the Greeks think, but what, how could a Greek understood what do we mean from our point of view by the term knowledge, right? So they had different terms for that. So first of all is gnosis, or in the English language we usually say gnosis. So this is the knowledge of a whole system with a complete set of positions. This doesn't mean that a human being only can achieve this whole system, or just a man could get this complete sets of position. Of course not. Gnosis is also something that could be attributed to God. For example, Zeus, or Apollo, or Athens, or any other deities of ancient Greek mythology, could obtain the whole idea, the whole paradigm, as we could say, and by paradigm we mean the sample or a certain pattern of this kind of scientific, well, and even the knowledge about everything in the world, on the outer world first of all. So when we said that these deities had gnosis, we mean that they know everything except their own future, except their own fortune. And you know that in ancient Greece, deities did not know their fate. So the only deities that really were acquainted with their fate and they really obtained that knowledge were Moiras, right? So they were three, as according to the myth, a famous myth, they were three old women, even crones, with only one eye, and they weaved a certain thread of life, and each person's life depended on their opinion and their thread and their eye. So nobody except them, nobody but them really knew their fate. Nobody, even gods. So we know the myths where Prometheus or Zeus have to travel to Moiras in attempt to understand what is going to be in future, or what is his or her fate. But really, gods do not know what will be in the future. That is why gnosis is a kind of idealistic approach to this understanding of knowledge, but at the same time, it could be principally achieved, right? So this we have to mention. Also, the second position for knowledge, as we can understand, what we could mean by knowledge in terms of antiquity is mathema. So we know this word via the word mathematics. And by this term, the Greeks meant the knowledge of something that could be taught. So, for example, so everybody here is at a university, right? So we study something, people teach us something, right? The professors and the lecturers teach us something. And this knowledge, well, this science or these techniques of experimental approach to this or that problem could be really taught. So this is how do we learn to count. So if the person has learned how to count, he will never forget that, right? 1 and 1 will always be 2, and 3 and 3 will always give us 6. So in these terms, mathema is something like is something that we really have as our own inner part, right? As our own essence, something we know, and this is something that we are constructed of, right? That we are made of. And the next term that could be understood and could be mentioned here is episteme. And by this, the Greeks meant the study of something or learning of something. So we could probably call it science in terms of the set of positions and rules in the precise field. So when we speak about biology, or when we speak about physics, mathematics, philosophy, and other field of research, we mean that inside this sphere, inside this field, there are specific positions, there are specific problems, some issues, and different methods that really create the whole structure of this paradigm, this scientific paradigm. So something like this did episteme mean, because when we speak about different attitudes to science in ancient Greece, we cannot find really strict scientific approach to anything but medicine. For example, Socrates, when he wanted to say that he is eager to find the very strict concept or the very strict definition of this or that term, he he usually compared himself with somebody who helps the woman to get the baby, right? So this is called maieutics in ancient Greek tradition. So he compared himself to midwife, and at the same time he considered himself to be something like a doctor, because only medicine in ancient Greece were what we really could call this science as such, the strict form of knowledge, the strict type of knowledge. And well, finally here we will mention phronesis as a kind of knowledge of the proper and not proper. So we can also put it as a form of practical wisdom or savvy or maybe common sense. So when we read Plato's dialogues, or when we read Xenophanes' memorabilia about Socrates, we usually face with this term of phronesis in terms of the common sense. So somebody doesn't understand what goes on, somebody cannot say what is right or what is wrong, how to act and how not to act, what will be if he does this or that, and so forth. So concerning this, we deal with, well, when we face with this kind of problems, we usually say about phronesis as the form of everyday knowledge, right? Here in the scheme, of course, it is not complete. We also have to mention such a notion as techne. So it also came from ancient Greek in form of techniques and techniques and different other words. But in ancient Greece, they also, by techne, they also understood a certain form of understanding or attitude to the world that helps each person to lead not only right life, but the understanding of the world, right? So techne was a kind of form of education. So when one was educated, when one was bringing up in this paradigm of antiquity, he was created as, for example, the master tries to create a piece of art. So in these terms, the master was called technitas, and the very action, how he deal with this situation, how he deal with this problem was called techne, as a certain process of forming the image of something, especially the image of a person. Later, they got the idea of paideia, or the education as such, and I also advise you to have a look at the famous and very informative book by Werner Jäger, who was the German scholar and who really started the tradition of paideia. So he has 3 volumes of this book named Paideia. So in Greek that meant education, and he really tries to understand how the very idea of education helped to create not only the educational ideology, but also the ancient Greek mythological and state ideology of the first Hellenic states, so the first policies. When we speak about the appearance of science in antiquity, in ancient Greece especially, we have to mention some principal people who really made their contributions to this development. Probably the first person whom we have to mention was Thales of Miletus, and he is also, as you remember, he was also considered to be the first philosopher in tradition. So Thales was the one who not only said that all is water, that everything really is water, but he was the first successful geometer of ancient Greece. He also developed different theorems about about triangles. He also was the first person, as Diogenes Laertius says in his famous work, he was the first person who really tried to measure the tried to give the measures of the Egyptian pyramids when the shadows of the pyramids were of the same measure, of the same size as the very size of pyramid itself when the sun was in zenith. And finally, Thales of Miletus was a famous politician who really led his state against Athens, and he was very successful in his political activity when under his command Athens was the Athenians failed in one of the navy struggles. The second person whom we have to mention will be Pythagoras of Samos. We also, well, last time we also said some words about him, and you remember that Pythagoras was a nickname because, well, we don't know his real name, but Pythagoras really meant the one who speaks, who says the truth as often as Pythia. So Pythia, you know, was the one, well, the woman who really served in the temple of Apollo in Delphi. And she gave the truth, right? She gave the true oracles to those who asked her about, and well, who really asked gods how to do this or that and how to act in this or that situation. So Pythagoras was a nickname, and he considered himself to be a deity, and he made his followers consider to think him, right? He made his followers to think that he was God himself. We know such a fable about his life also after Diogenes Laertius, that once Pythagoras hid in a certain place, and only his mother knew where he really was. So he didn't get away in a month, well, during the month. And after that, he, well, went to the people and he said that he was in Hades, and he really knew everything that was going on the earth. And when he retell the stories of people, and then he retell the situation that happened in the polis, people really understood that they deal with a kind of deity, they deal with somebody who is equal to gods. So Pythagoras was a famous mathematician, and he was one of the founders of the first schools, scientific schools of ancient Greece. His followers were named after him, the Pythagoreans. Among them, we could mention also Miletus and, well, different other mathematicians who really worked in the field of measuring the square roots of one, right, as you know, the first irrational numbers as such. And when Pythagoreans understood that there are the irrational numbers, they claimed this to be the greatest achievements gods really led them to know about. And this was a kind of prohibition not to tell anybody about these achievements, because it was, well, something like a piece of sanctuary, let me say, well, a piece of sacrification, right? And when one of the Pythagoreans really told the other people that they know this kind of thing, they cursed him, and he really died unhappily, so he drowned during his voyage to Athens from Italy. So Pythagoreans were one of the first sects in ancient tradition. By sect, I do not only mean the scientific school, but also the religious aspect of their activities, because really when they measured, when they dealt with numbers, when they tried to develop their mathematical operations and so forth, they really thought that they served gods. Their main god, of course, was Zeus, but also they thought that Hermes and Apollo were the ones that really defend them. And at the same time, they considered to be the sages of ancient tradition, because they really dealt with something, well, as they served the gods, they were able to give their predictions. And we even know that Pythagoras himself gave some predictions, and he gave certain restrictions to his followers. For example, not to eat beans or not to cross the field, right? The next person whom we have to mention will be Euclid. His activity took place in the 4th century BC. Euclid, I think, well, everybody knows who this person was, but we have also to mention that his famous origins, his Elements, right, the book named Elements, or Stoicheia in ancient Greek, became one of the most published books ever in the modern tradition. So they say that the first place was occupied by the Bible, of course, and the second place was Euclid. Well, in the 20th century, as far as I remember, that was 20th century survey when they really asked what was the most published books ever. So the first place took Shakespeare's plays, the second was Bible, and Euclid took number 4. So still, he's one of the most published authors in the human tradition. And probably this is because the very orientation of the modern science of the 15th and the 17th ages, from 15th to the 17th ages, was to the mathematical and geometrical approach to science. For example, famous René Descartes considered his science to be as strict, his philosophy to be as strict as geometry. Famous philosopher Spinoza tried to demonstrate his positions and his statements by applying so-called geometrical method. And when we open his book, we will find that his ethics was written with the employment of and the usage with the geometrical order of demonstration, right? So we have to remember that the mathematics and the very ideal of mathematical tradition and the tradition of, well, the very understanding of strict knowledge and science as such, in modernity was very closely connected with the mathematical and geometrical developments of Euclid. Also, he was one of the people who really started his discourse, started his book not from something magical, right, or something irrational. He was the person who started from the axioms, right, something which is obvious, something which doesn't need any demonstrations. For example, that two parallel lines will never intervene, right? They will never intersect each other. So this obvious position laid in the very basis of the so-called Euclidean geometry, and it was re-observed and reconsidered only in the late 18th and the very beginning of the 19th century by famous German mathematician Riemann and our Russian geometer Lobachevsky. And the fourth person whom we have to mention will be Hippocrates. He was the founder of medicine, as we understand this discipline nowadays. And as I have already said, this field of human intellectual and practical activity in ancient Greece really was considered to be the strictest. Because when we speak about natural philosophy, when we speak about mathematics, when we speak about even geography, we deal with a lot of mythological stuff, right? A lot of mythological ideas and prescriptions. For example, when they said that, well, somewhere there are the barbarians and we are the civilized Greeks, right? They also meant that there are the edges of the world, and nobody can really reach the other side of Earth because Earth is plane, and after the Gibraltar, there is nothing but the open sea. Well, Plato says that somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean there used to be an island where the Atlants lived, but after a natural disaster, the catastrophe, it disappeared, and now there is nothing there, but the ships cannot go anywhere because the very Atlantic island just it doesn't offer them any, it doesn't give them any opportunity to go forth, right? So this is a kind of natural barrier. So in these terms, Hippocrates was one of the people who dealt with strict form of knowledge, and when he says that you have to do like this and not to do like this to cure people, to heal the problem, right, to heal the disease, he meant that the followers must do concretely these things, right? So these was the prescriptions. At the same time, Hippocrates is famous for giving a great system which describes the interrelations of temperaments of people and nature in terms of his medical approach. So Here is the quotation from one of the most famous textbooks on the history of philosophy by the Italian colleagues Giovanni Reali and Dario Antiseri, who really say about Hippocrates' works on the nature of man that we find their theoretical completion a genuine scheme which organizes the medical experience. So Hippocrates didn't even think that we can heal the disease or cure the person only by our own means. We also have to intervene the natural process. We have to deal with the nature itself, because each person is a human being, and each human being takes its own place in the order of the world, in the order of nature. So here is the scheme by which we can illustrate the idea of Hippocrates. So you know that according to his doctrine, each of us has his or her own temperament. So for me, for example, I'm melancholic according to this scheme. So I'm someone who is very close to fall, right, to autumn, as a certain middle age and a certain season when my temperament feels itself the best. And as for me, well, I cannot say that I'm depressed and intellectual, really, but truly speaking, Hippocrates really thought that if a person is melancholic, he has something cold and dry, not only in his temperament, but also in his inner stuff, right? So when we speak about the sanguine person, and that this person must be hot and moist, and fire is the element of this person, so he is emotional and proud, and we can describe him or her in any other terms. So sanguine people really deal with blood. So sanguine in Latin means blood, and that is why when the person, for example, has red face, we have to let the blood come outside to make it less red and to make it more pale in these terms. So when we speak about this system of the whole world, we have to remember that we as the human beings always take our own place in this order of the world, or order of the world, and according to the place we really get and we take, we could be treated in these or that ways, right? So we have to give the personal approach to each man and to each woman and to the babies and to the old people and so forth. That is why one of the most influential methods that Hippocrates really developed was the observation. So he didn't say that we have to intervene the nature of the person. We do not have to intervene into the body of the person at once. We have to observe, and one of his commandments was noli nocere. That means not to make the worse, right? Not to bring the situation into from bad to worse, let me say it like this. So the next thing that we have to deal with is the opposition between knowledge and opinion, and here we have to mention two principal concepts which are doxa and episteme. So in the Greek philosophy and the Greek intellectual tradition, even the intellectual tradition of the whole Antiquity, we deal with two kinds of thought. So something private, and let me say it in terms of our modern vocabulary, something subjective, and something objective or something public, which is episteme, not doxa. So by doxa we mean something empirical, unproven, half knowledge of transient and becoming. So we say that something is this because we personally think so. I think that, for example, I think that Earth is round, or I think that Earth is plane, or I think that Earth is square. Okay, that means that this is my own approach to the problem how to describe Earth. But this is only doxa. This is also only my opinion, which is based upon my experience, my knowledge, my education, my subjective mood. In terms of something objective, in terms of a certain doctrine, or let me say educational system of paideia, which I have already mentioned, we speak about episteme as a theoretical or proven learning of the true state of things. So this concept of true state of things, or state of things as such, was coined by Aristotle in his own works. And when he speaks about physics, for example, he says that we have to understand the very order of nature and the very causes that lead us to this or that understanding of what happens in the sublunar world. So when we know that there are different opinions, we of course could compare and say that probably some of them could be true and could be proven, some of them not. So, could be proved and some of them not. From this point of view, we say that theory or observation is the very, is really the unique method for understanding which is true, because theoretical knowledge is the knowledge of something state, of something stable even, right? Of something not moved, motionless, let me say. So we have to remember from this division of opinion and knowledge that the Greeks considered the theoretical knowledge to be the true knowledge, really the proven knowledge, because our world is full of different and very occasional things, occasional events, and in these terms we cannot say that if something happened, it is the law. No, we have to observe, and when we understand the causes, when we understand the principles of this event and principles of this action, only then we can say that this really takes place, and this really is something that needs our attention. Now we have to deal with the principal scheme of the development of ancient Greek tradition in philosophy and in science as such. So usually when they say about the very origin of scientific or theoretical tradition in ancient Greece, they speak about so-called 7 sages, among whom was Thales of Miletus, and we have already said some words about him and his activity. So 7 sages were those wizards, those wise people, let me say, who gave the most principal, moral and political statements to how to organize their life in polis, how to organize life as such, how to bring people up, right, and how to live in the world. When we know what we are and what we have to do. So one of them was Thales, and he is probably the only person who was taken, who was considered one of the 7, because we have different lists, and in each of them Thales really takes his own place. So after him, usually people say about 3 principal schools of ancient Greek thought, which one of which is the Ionic school. And in Ionic school we can find not only Thales, who said that all is water, but also we find Anaximandros, who said that everything is to aipiron, or something that has no border or barriers or frontiers, something extend. Here we also find Anaximenes, who said that something is extend or vast air. And also sometimes we mention Heraclitus of Ephesus, who considered fire to be the very essence of the world. About fire, he also said that it is logos, or something rational, something understandable, that really rules our world. But at the same time, he said that time, or eon as such, the age as such, is like a baby who plays dices. So when something happened, this is only just a piece of reality, and we have to understand what is the cause of this event. When we understand this, we say that our world could be considered to be rational, that our world really is ruled by the principal statements. And Ionic school was the one who tried to find the principal element the rational element of everything, right? So here, at this level, at the level of these principal pre-Socratic schools, as they usually are called, we deal with the most, the best developed natural philosophy in ancient Greek tradition. Also, we have to mention the Eleatic school, where we find only two representatives, who are Parmenides and Zeno of Elea. Parmenides said that the truth is something one, and there are many opinions. That is why it is very important to know what is true, or as he said, dike, which is really just at the same time, because truth and justice were very closely connected in the mind of the ancient Greeks. And also he said that there is, that something really is and nothing isn't. So this is the a kind of translation of his main idea. So everything that happens in our world happens not because something occasional, right? It happens not because this is just the element of reality, that just a minute in reality, right? But because it needed to happen. It should happen, really. So that is why we have to say that there are no changes in our world. Heraclitus said that everything changes. And one of his most famous statements is that we cannot get into one river twice, because river flows and the water is not the same each minute, each second, each moment of time. Parmenides said something completely different. He said that everything we deal with in reality, everything we try to understand as the outer world, never changes. That is why there are only the principal elements of the essence, the principal elements of the substance of this world, and we have to understand the causes of them, because the world really is given to us in its wholeness. Yeah.
This is the idea of faith.
The idea of?
Faith.
You mean whom?
That is true. I mean that there is everything in the world and it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So you mean fight? Well, I mean, so okay. Oh, fate. Goodness. Okay, fate. I have to say that each of the philosophers really thought that Tyche or Moira, right, as they said about the fate or fortune, really took it into consideration. Of course, you're right that when you say that Parmenides really understood that this is the way of fate, right? That's true. So Zeno is famous as not only his follower, but the one who tried to prove his idea. I mean, the Parmenides idea, or that nothing changes. And he's famous for his so-called aporias. So from ancient Greek, aporia mean something that doesn't let us to go forward, doesn't let us to move. So his famous aporias, I just can give you some examples. For example, a famous problem of Achilles and tortoise. So you remember that one of the descriptions of Achilles in Homer's Iliad was the one who has fast legs, right, fast feet. So Zeno says that if we try to put Achilles and tortoise and we ask tortoise to start its way, so we will try to give the we will give the tortoise the opportunity to come the first. It really will come first, because Achilles will never reach it. He will always chase it, but he will never reach it, because just imagine a kind of the way, right? And we say that when tortoise comes the first part of the way, let it be from, for example, the part A, only then Achilles starts his way, and before he will run faster than the tortoise, right, run further even than the tortoise, he will have to get to this point A. But while he will get to this point A, tortoise will get to point B. And then, to get the tortoise, Achilles will have to get to point B, and so forth. Zeno thought that this is impossible to prove, I mean, not practically, but theoretically, demonstrate that Achilles will ever run faster than the tortoise, because the tortoise will always be in a further position, right? Probably a small, but really further position. We know the famous anecdote about Diogenes, who wanted to disprove this really inconsistent, at the first glance, inconsistent argument. So he just stood up, as we know from Diogenes Laertius, and walked in front of Zeno, trying to demonstrate that, well, there is motion, and you cannot prove that tortoise is faster than Achilles. But the very core of this idea is that we have to prove it or disprove it theoretically. Another example of this aporia is about dart, or about arrow. So just imagine that we have a bow, we have the target, and we have to shoot the arrow from our bow to this target. So when we do this, we try to analyze the very way of arrow to the target. So each time we stop our arrow, we see that, when we have this diagram, right, of how arrow goes, we see that at each very point, at each very position of its way, it is not in motion, but it is something stable, right? The position is stable. So that is why, says Zeno, theoretically we cannot say, well, in terms of theory, in terms of the observation of the world, we cannot say that there is motion. So motion is something occasional. This is how the world appears in front of our eyes. But this is not the cause of the world. It is not the cause of the events. It is not something that really exists. That is why it is really important to understand, well, attitude to the world theoretically and not practically. So about Pythagoras and Pythagoreans, we have already said some words. We will not stop any more of them. So Thales really influenced Ionic school, and the Ionic school really influenced on Anaxagoras. So Anaxagoras from Clazomene was one of the most important predecessors of Socrates, and he really developed a very interesting concept of natural philosophy when he said that not logos but nous, or mind itself, really rules the whole world. So what does it mean? It means that everything in the world is coherent, everything is rational, and that is why there must be something that has all the definitions and has all the theoretical approaches to the things in the world, to each event, to each stuff, right? To each piece of stuff. So if we want to understand what happens in the world, we have to get to the rational arguments and not to any experimental attitudes, just because when we try to make anything experimentally, when we try to understand that something happens like this or like that in terms of our experience, we really deal with something occasional. So everything is ruled by nous, by this mind, the universal mind of the world, and Anaxagoras was one of those people who really thought that if the world is reasonable, well, I mean, it is rational, right? We can understand it in terms of our rationality, in terms of our mind. Everything is ruled by logic, which this nous, this mind, has. So after Anaxagoras, we come to the Sophists and Socrates. So this is the 4th century BC. Oh, sorry, the 5th century BC, because Socrates died 399 BC. And the Sophists were those who came to Athens as wandering sages from different parts of Hellas, and they tried to teach Athenians how to perform at the courts of law. You remember that in ancient Athens, well, in ancient Greece, they didn't have any professional accusers or professional defenders in law. That is why each person who wanted to accuse somebody really must have performed himself. right? And those who didn't want to pay any fees or to get imprisoned, he really must defend himself. So that is why sophists were very helpful in this kind of tradition, because they said that they are able to teach how to make even the weakest argument to be strong. What does this mean? For example, we have some sophisms, which are the problems that took their names after the sophists. And one of the sophism, one of this riddle, of this problem, as you wish, is so-called the horned. So, for example, someone says, you have something that you didn't lost. Is it true? Yes, that's true. But you didn't lose the horns. That means you are horned. So you wear horns, right? Another example of this sophism is that, for example, we have the bag, and inside this bag there sits a man. So we ask, for example, a person, right? So do you know who is in the bag? And he or she says, no, I don't. And he says, okay, but this is your brother, so you don't know your brother, right? So if somebody says yes, we ask, so who is there, right? And of course, it's very difficult to predict who could that be. So you see that the sophists were concerned on so-called logical mistakes, right? So they really were able to make so the weakest argument, they make the weakest argument sound stronger, right? By their own techniques, the rhetoric techniques. That's why sophists are very important in terms of the rhetoric and the tradition of eloquence. And also we have to mention, among many sophists, we have to mention famous Pythagoreans, who is well known because his first statement that man is the measure of all things. Exist those that exist because they exist, and those which do not because they do not. So what does this mean, that man is the measure of all things? As you understand, we perceive the world, we feel the world, right? We are in the world, and as far as we see that something happens and something doesn't, that there is something in the world or there isn't something, we say that, for example, there is no justice in our state, right, in our polis, if we are, for example, the Athenians. Okay, if there is no justice, that means that we think so. So this is our subjective, our opinion, right? This is how we really think. But as far as we think so, we can prove it prove it anyhow. Another interesting example of such a sophism, such a statement made by sophists, also traced back to Pythagoras, who started his famous work on gods with the following phrase that about gods we cannot say anything because we cannot say anything either because it is very complicated, it is very difficult, or because it is not something the mind of human being deals with, right? So this is the point where really the Greek philosophy came to the demand for understanding what a human being is. So before that, as I said, we dealt with natural philosophy, with questions about the elements of nature, about the very essence of nature, the substance, and so forth. Now we have an interesting detour into the field of anthropology. So now we are going to deal with the human personality, and one of the crucial figures here is Socrates, who developed his own moral philosophy and who is considered to be the founder of moral or ethical tradition in history of philosophy. So let me remind once again, he died in 399 BC. After his, so one of the most influential philosophers in this at that time was Democritus. Besides Anaxagoras, Sophists, and Socrates, there was Democritus, who was the first person who spoke about the atoms. So the atom from ancient Greek really means that something indivisible, right? Indivisible, something you cannot divide into anything. So in Latin it got the idea of individual, and from this we see that Democritus said that the whole world consists of some principal and very small particles which could not be divided into anything, and depending on the very essence of this particle we see different kinds, different types of events, different kinds of things, and so forth. But it's very interesting that Democritus really thought that our world is very occasional, because atoms, or these principal particles, are always in motion. So they always move, they always travel around the universe. That is why the world we have right now, and we really see right now, is just a moment in the whole history of the universe. And this moment will sometime it started, but sometime it will finish. So we think that we live forever. Our world lives forever. Existed. Well, our world has always existed, right? But this is only the moment in time, and when it is finished, the atoms will go away and they will create another form of world, and we will not understand it, and we will not even exist in this kind of world, right? So this is a quite interesting idea which will be highlighted by Epicurus a bit later. One of the most important developments of ancient Greek tradition after Socrates were Socratic schools, which we find in Megara, Elis, and Cyrene, in different cities of ancient Greek oikumena. Of course, the Cynic school, which was established by one of the followers of Socrates, his name was Aristippus, and the best probably discovery that Socrates made in his life was Plato. Usually they say that Beethoven is the best composition of Haydn, and the greatest discovery of Davy was Michael Faraday. So the greatest discovery of Socrates was Plato, who is considered to be the founder of a famous academy. And Plato was Plato has become one of the most influential thinkers ever. We can mention only a few of them, such as, besides Plato, we can mention Aristotle, of course, Descartes, Bacon, Kant, Hegel, probably Husserl and Heidegger in the 20th century. But they are the pillars upon which the whole building of our civilization and our intellectual climate stands. So Plato was very much influenced by Pythagoras and the Pythagorean tradition, and after his death, of course, Aristotle came in fourth. But besides, we have to mention so-called Hellenic schools, among which we mention Epicureanism, right, and the Epicureans, then the skeptics, or sometimes they also call the Pyrrhonists, after the name of a famous Pyrrhon, the founder of the school. And finally, one of the most influential Hellenic school, especially in terms of morality and in terms of the principal restrictions which could one give to the human nature, made by the Stoics, right? As I have already said, Democritus really made great impact on Epicurus, but we have to distinguish his doctrine from the one of Democritus, because Epicurus didn't think that our world is occasional. He thought that we have a so-called effect, which he called klinamen, and that was the possibility for the world to happen, right? Not to move forward and to stop existing as such. That is why Epicurus was one of founders of very influential moral tradition in the Hellenic culture. So his followers called him the savior of the world, because Epicurus invented such a phrase. When we are dead, when we are alive, there is no death, and when there is death, we are not alive anymore, right? That is why we never face with death in our life. That is why it is important not to be afraid of death. That is why it is important not to be afraid of the fall of the regimes, of the fall of the states, of of the end of civilizations and so forth. Just because we will follow our life, we will continue to be something different, not to be the same as we have got to be, right? Also, after Plato, except Academy, we have to mention Aristotle and the Peripatetics, and about Aristotle we will say a bit later. Skeptics were very influential in terms of Academy, especially after the 1st century BC, when the skeptics came into Academy, and during during 5 centuries, Academy of Plato was really skeptical in terms of the doctrine they developed. And finally, after Plato, we find very important and especially in the ecclesiastic tradition, the doctrine of Neoplatonists, and here we have to mention Plotinus, so not to confuse with Plato, who said that God could be understood in terms of emanation. So if you just recall something like the Turkish fountain, you remember that there is the main bowl, right, and the minor bowls on each level. So this is something like the emanation of the from the principal bowl, right, when water goes less on the lower and lower levels. And this is how God really appears to be in the world. So he gives us different types of appearance, different types of essence, and by this we can understand that the human soul came into existence, came into being only because it just fell from God. So we have, each of us has a kind of piece of this God's soul, right? The universal God's soul. Neoplatonists, Aristotle, and especially Peripatetics, which developed the logic, the formal logic, and of course the physical tradition, then Plato and the followers of Academy, and of course Stoics, especially from the point of view of their morality, were very influential and made great impact on the medieval civilization and the medieval science as such. So we are going to deal with the medieval civilization, and let me remind you that we consider the Middle Ages to start from the fall of Western Roman Empire. As you remember, it happened in 376 AD, right, when the barbarians and the Goths and the Vandals came to Rome and came to Italy, and they conquered Rome. So here in the Middle Ages, which will finish with the fall of the Second Rome, or Byzantine Empire, in 1453 AD, we deal with a quite interesting representation of scientific knowledge, and Byron Heidegger, in his famous essay Die Zeit des Weltbildes, says to be the doctrina and scientia, right? So doctrine, the very word doctrina or doctrine, it comes from Latin and means that something could be taught, right? It comes from the verb doceo, which means to teach, and scientia comes from the word scio, that means I know. So scientia is something that could be obtained as a form of knowledge, right? But mind please that when we speak about the knowledge and science of Middle Ages, the very idea of truth is not something uncovered as it used to be in the previous stage in Antiquity, but something like veritas, so something that we have to believe in to understand that it is true. So why is it so? First of all, because one of the characteristics of this kind of medieval knowledge is the divine revelation. So the revelation is the source of any knowledge. We cannot know anything besides the divine will. If God doesn't want us to know something, that means that He doesn't reveal this, and that is why we cannot understand, we cannot make an experiment, we cannot say that something is so anyhow, but only following the Holy Scripture and the divine source. Second position is that medieval science is quite an authoritative knowledge. So what do I mean by this? First of all, I mean that any form of knowledge, any positions, any statements must be addressed to a certain famous sage, a certain saint, or God Himself. So what does it mean that you know something? That means that you were taught like this or like that. That means that you follow the doctrine. That means that you follow the tradition. And if St. Augustine says that it is so, or for example, Pseudo-Dionysius Areopagite says that it is not so, that means that this is true. Because the knowledge is very authoritative form of human activity. And finally, the final characteristic of knowledge is that the only means how to understand the reality is the interpretation of the Holy Scripture. So by this we have to coin the term of hermeneutics. So hermeneutics comes after the name of Hermes Trismegistus. I will say some words about him a bit later, but by this word I mean the interpretation precisely the Holy Scripture, right? After that, only in the beginning of the 19th century and then the 20th century, we deal this notion of hermeneutics as the interpretation of the texts as such. But first of all, it concerned only the Holy Scripture. And of course, we have to mention the main epistemological milestones of this period of time. So the most famous, probably, milestone in this, from this point of view, is the problem of the universals. So what kind of nature do the universals or the general concepts have? This was the problem which was put by Porphyry, a famous commentator to Aristotle, or of Aristotle, and then Porphyry was commented by famous Boethius, who was one of the most influential Roman philosophers of the 5th century AD. And they really had the problem like this. So either the universals have their own nature, so they really exist, or they do not exist as they do not have their nature, but they exist only as names. For example, when I say God, does it mean that I say about something that really exists somewhere, or it is only the name? Of course, this is a very radical example, but in terms of the 21st century, I can use it. In terms of, for example, the 12th or even the 7th century, I cannot give an example like that. But this could be used for anything. For example, when I say a man, does really the man exist? Or this is only the concept? Because we know that when we say man, there are different men, right? There are men that are under 30 years old of age, right? There are women, of course. There are babies. There are old people, and so forth. So that was one of the most crucial problems for Middle Ages, and of course, it was really influential even until the very Renaissance. So the next epistemological milestone of the medieval tradition was the dogma of filioque. So filioque in Latin means "and from the Son." By Son I mean the Son of God. So you remember that there is a so-called credo, or the symbol of the belief which the Christians follow, and this is a famous prayer when we speak it, right? When we pronounce this, we mean that we are going to follow this Christian tradition. So in the Eastern tradition, they say that the Holy Spirit comes also from the Son, not only from the Father. In Eastern tradition, they say that only from Father. This was the main problem for the Second Nicene Council, and in 1054 there appeared the Great Schism, after which there appeared two great branches of Christianity, the Catholic or the Western and the Orthodox or the Eastern. So the dogma of filioque is precisely the Western tradition of Christianity, and as far as we speak about the history of philosophy as such and history of science as such, we have to mention this milestone, because our terms really face with the Western tradition. And finally, one of the most important achievements of the medieval doctrine and the medieval knowledge was the Christianization of Aristotle made by Thomas Aquinas. So what do I mean by this? I think will be clear from the next slide. So how did medieval people understand the world, and how did they think about the physical circumstances of our universe according to Aristotle and Aquinas as such? You remember that Aristotle was the one who developed the logic, the formal logic, as the universal mean, the universal means by which we can observe and understand the nature of things, and well, really the way of speech as such. So he was a famous theoretician of rhetorics. So Aristotle thought that there are two kinds of world. So the physical one, which is the world of motion and becoming, so everything becomes and appears in this world, or he also calls it sublunar world, sublunar level. So this is the world where we do live. Everything changes, everything goes, everything is in motion, and we have to understand that this world is not perfect. But there is the perfect world, which is metaphysical, which is beyond the physics, and this is the literal idea of metaphysics. So the literal translation of metaphysics, so something beyond physics, right? Something beyond the motion, as a certain cause and a certain immobility. So this is the sphere of stable things. Here God lives, and Aristotle always says that he is the unmoved mover, so, or primum mobile. So this is a very interesting term, which meant that everything that has, everything that moves must have a certain cause of motion. If everything changes, there must be the cause of this kind of change. So what is the cause of any motion? It must be something that is motionless, that doesn't move, because if it moves, it is not the cause. I hope the idea is clear, right? So we have to understand that there must be something which is stable and which gives the movement to everything. So for example, we have the magnet, and we put it somewhere where we have, for example, the iron nails or iron paper clips, right? So we will see that the magnet will give the motion to the paper clips or to the iron nails, but it will not move itself, right? So this is something that is immobile, that is not in motion, but still gives the cause of motion to everything. So here we can see the famous scheme of the universe created by Ptolemy. So in the very center of the universe we find the Earth, right? And Aquinas was quite agree with Aristotle in these things. So the nearest sky, the nearest heaven is the heaven of the moon, then the Mercury, right, the Venus, then only the Sun, then Mars, right, Jupiter, the Saturn, and here we can see Coelum Imperium Habitaculum Dei. So this is the place, this is the heaven where God lives. Why here God lives? Because this is the metaphysical world which gives the cause to motion. And here is, well, after we have the level of Saturn, we have the level of the immobile stars. So the Greeks and Ptolemy and Aristotle and Aquinas, as the follower of this logic, really thought that here we don't have anything in motion, so all the constellations, all the stars do not move, but they're just on a certain level, and they're really stable. Speaking about the interesting form that could give the opportunity of the special medieval science appear and medieval knowledge appear, we have to mention not only the dogmatic case, because St. Aquinas, you understand, was a theologian who tried to Christianize Aristotle as one of the most influential philosophers of the pagan times. But also this is the time of human history when the first universities appeared. So the first universities, of course, had different faculties. For example, we know that there are the faculty of theology, faculty of laws, faculty of medicine, and so forth. But one of the interesting achievements of this universal university system was the creation of so-called the faculty of liberal arts or free arts. So here we have the same division into two great levels, so the trivium and the quadrivium. So trivium is consisted from three principal steps, right? The logical, the grammar, and the rhetorical. So the logic is the art of thinking, the grammar is the art of inventing and combining symbols, and the rhetoric is the art of communication. So this is after this trivium education level, the person got the bachelor degree. So we could say that this is the level of arts as such. The quadrivium gave us the examples of what we can say, what we can call the scientific education, and after getting this education, person became the master of arts, as we have it nowadays, so the bachelor level and the master's level. So the four arts were dedicated to the quantity pertaining to matter, and here we have also two divisions, so the arithmetics and music as the discrete quality of number, or number, right, and geometry and astronomy as the continuous quantity. So arithmetics is theory of number, so what does number mean and how can we count anything. Music is the application of the theory of number, and well, music really was considered to be the scientific branch of investigation. Geometry is the theory of space, so how the space is organized and how can we understand and deal with this kind of organization. And finally, astronomy, probably the most subtle and most sublime branch of knowledge, the application of the theory of space. When person finished his higher education or the university education, he had to follow one of the colleagues, let me say, or one of the, collegiums, or one of the circles that so he had to get a certain, not only a certificate of the higher education, but also to be, also to enter the professional society, let me say it like this, okay? So for example, Dante Alighieri, he finished the School of Laws in Bologna, and after he got the certificate, he really had to enter one of the collegiums in his native town of Florence, and that was the Collegium of St. Luke. And St. Luke, as you know, he really is the patron of doctors, right? So Dante Alighieri, who was really the lawyer who entered the professional society of doctors, right? So that was a kind of interesting form of organization of this kind of relations in the Middle time. So this is actually the last slide I'm going to show you, but not this time, but the next time, because this is just the bridge from the medieval period of scientific development to the Renaissance. So let us just pass it, if you don't mind. And here I have the example of the examination task, and probably this is something beyond our agenda, so the lecture is finished. So how do we see the examination? So first of all, I have to say that you can pass the exam in two ways, either in remote way, so distantly, or you may do it right here, but you are not going to speak, you are going to write. So there are going to be 5, probably 7 different variants of their tasks. In each task, there are going to be 3 questions. So, well, or 3 statements or 3 problems you are going to solve. So how can you solve them? You have to give a synopsis of your answer, not the answer as such. So it is not the essay, it is something you write as the plan of your essay, not more than 7 statements. So here is the example of the task, and here is the example of possible answer. Except this, and also as a kind of instance, you may find it in the synopsis I ask our colleagues to put on Vkontakte, right, before our lecture. So this brief plan of what we are going to discuss each lecture is a possible instance of our of this kind of answer to this examination task. And the second position, how to answer this task, how to solve this task, is to give the keywords. I hope you also you have also seen that in the synopsis there are key figures and key words, right, in the very end of the paper. So here is the same. To make your idea probably more clear, more precise, or to mention something that is beyond the very synopsis, the very plan of your answer, you can find, well, you can give and put some keywords afterwards, not more than 10 really, like modern anthropocentrism, ancient cosmocentrism, and so forth, right? So the keywords must show that you understand the terms which you could use if you had to answer to this question orally, right? The possible answer, so the plan of your answer, gives the idea that you see the connections between different different lectures, right? Different areas of our knowledge which we discuss. So each task will be a kind of the problem which, so we will ask you to give the answer and to make the connections between different areas of different lectures, right? So for example, in this example of the possible examination task, you see that we try to deal with the idea of anthropocentrism, which actually came from the first lecture, and the classic science, and the lecture on classic science will be number 5, right? So lecture number one and lecture number 5 will be mixed together, and we are awaiting that you will be able to show your ability to make these connections clear. Okay? Yes, sure.